I never imagined a human body could turn toxic, but that night in 1994 changed everything. My hands still tremble when I recall the ER incident that earned Gloria Ramirez the nickname, the Toxic Lady. I was there, a young medical professional at Riverside General Hospital, and I witnessed firsthand the bizarre and terrifying events. Even now, I can't escape the haunting memories of that case, a case that blurs the line between medical fact, conspiracy, and something almost supernatural. It was a cold February evening in 1994, sometime after 8 p.m., when the paramedics rushed in a new patient. Gloria Ramirez, 31 years old, lay on the gurney, gasping for air. We knew she had late-stage cervical cancer, but nothing prepared us for what was to come. Her heart was racing, and her blood pressure plummeting. She was barely responsive, mumbling incoherent answers to our questions. As we attempted to stabilize her, following every procedure by the book, a sense of unease crept over me. We gave her drugs to steady her heartbeat, pumped oxygen, and when her heart fluttered chaotically, we reached for the defibrillator. I remember the overhead lights shining on her as we cut away her blouse for the electrode pads. That's when I noticed it, a strange oily sheen coating her skin. Under the harsh fluorescent light, her body glistened, as if covered in a slick film of perspiration mixed with something else. Leaning closer, I caught a whiff of a fruity, garlic-like odor emanating from her mouth. It wasn't the usual scent of acetone we smell on a diabetic in crisis, or the alcohol on an intoxicated patient. This was different, sweet and garlicky, yet somehow chemical. A chill ran down my spine, though I couldn't say why. One of the nurses, Susan, drew a vial of Gloria's blood for testing. As soon as she pulled back the plunger, an ammonia-like stench hit us. I've drawn blood hundreds of times. Blood isn't supposed to smell, certainly not like ammonia. Susan's nose wrinkled, and she held the tube up to the light. "Do you see that?" she whispered. I peered at the vial and felt my mouth go dry. Suspended in the dark red fluid were tiny manila-colored crystals, swirling slowly. Crystals in human blood. It made no sense. I exchanged a bewildered look with Julie, our resident physician, who murmured, This isn't right." Under my mask, I whispered a prayer that we weren't dealing with something truly sinister. What happened next plays in my mind like a nightmare in slow motion. Susan suddenly gasped and dropped the syringe. She stumbled back, one hand on her face. "It burns," she cried out. I saw panic in her eyes just before they rolled back, and she collapsed to the floor. For a heartbeat I froze. This was a seasoned, registered nurse, suddenly out cold, on the trauma room floor. Before I could react, Julie, who had been examining the blood sample, swayed on her feet. "I feel lightheaded," she said weakly, handing me the vial as her lips turned ashen. I reached out to steady her, but she backed away, instinctively moving towards the door for fresh air. Alarm bells rang in my head. Was there a gas leak? A toxic chemical on the patient? Julie made it as far as the nurse's station, just outside the trauma bay. I heard someone shout, "Help! She's going down." Then Julie crumpled to the ground, fainting as well. The ER burst into a frenzy around us. Code blue, code red. We weren't sure what we were dealing with. Maureen, our respiratory therapist, had been helping ventilate Gloria. She stepped out to call for a crash cart. I saw her suddenly sag against the wall. Later she told us that the odor hit her like a wall, and her limbs went numb just before she passed out when she awoke moments later. She couldn't move her arms or legs. 3 of my colleagues down, and we still had a dying patient on the gurney. I felt a wave of nausea and a prickling on my own skin, whether from real fumes or sheer adrenaline, I couldn't tell. The trauma bay was now thick with a metallic chemical temps mingled with panic. "All clear the year," someone yelled. Security ushered other patients out to the parking lot as nurses and orderlies, some coughing, some dizzy, scrambled to evacuate the emergency room. An internal emergency was declared. In over a decade of medicine, I'd never seen that. My mouth was dry, heart hammering, but I refused to leave Gloria's side. 2 other doctors, and I remained a skeleton crew in the toxic storm, determined to save our patient, or at least keep her stable. We donned what protective gear we could grab: masks, gowns, gloves, a pathetic barrier against an unknown poison. The air felt heavy, each breath shallow through my mask. Monitors beeped erratically as Gloria's heart rate slowed further. We continued CPR, our hands slipping on that greasy film coating her skin. Drugs, shocks, oxygen, nothing could coax her failing heart back to a steady rhythm. Amid the chaos, I remember glancing at the doorway. Staff clustered beyond it, eyes wide with terror, unwilling to re-enter. It struck me then that we were utterly alone with something possibly lethal. My colleague's face shield fogged with sweat and fear, mirroring my own dread. As I squeezed the ambu bag to help her breathe, I wondered if I was pumping some toxic vapor out of her lungs and into the room. In that moment, Gloria's eyes half opened, glassy, unfocused. Her lips moved as if she wanted to speak. I leaned closer, and for an instant I thought I heard a whisper, my own name, or just a rasp of escaping air. I'll never know, because right then, her heart flatlined with a drawn-out, ominous tone. At 8:50 p.m., after 45 minutes of futile effort, Gloria Ramirez was pronounced dead. The room fell quiet, except for the hiss of the oxygen and the ringing in my ears. I pressed 2 fingers to her neck, feeling for any pulse in vain, and realized my hand was trembling. 23 people in that had shown symptoms of mysterious illness, and 5 were now hospitalized due to whatever had emanated from this poor woman. And the aftermath. The ER looked like a war zone. Beds and equipment lay abandoned where we'd fled. The air still carried a faint whiff of garlic and ammonia, a smell that would wake me in cold sweats for weeks. We secured the trauma room and sealed it off, unsure if some invisible poison lingered. Within an hour, a special hazmat team arrived, figures in bulky yellow suits and opaque masks, looking like astronauts walking through our hospital halls. I watched in exhausted disbelief as they swept the ER for toxins, scanners and detectors in hand. These experts combed every corner, checking for poison gases or chemical spills that could have knocked out our staff. Nothing. They found absolutely nothing that could explain the fumes or the sickness that had overcome us. It was as if the toxic miasma we all experienced had evaporated into thin air, leaving no trace for their instruments. One of the hazmat doctors shook his helmeted head in perplexity, and I felt a sickening mix of relief and dread. Relief that no lingering danger was detected. Dread because we still had no answers. Gloria's body was treated with utmost caution. I could only watch from outside the sealed glass as the hazmat team carefully placed her corpse in a rubber body bag, then into a sealed aluminum casket. The entire process felt surreal. We had never handled a body this way, as if it were radioactive. Rumors buzzed through the staff gathered outside. Did she spill some kind of poison on herself? Are we dealing with a new virus? I heard one whisper about nerve gas. Another suggested Gloria had been part of a military experiment, given the rapid appearance of government officials. Indeed, men in dark suits were suddenly in the administrative offices by morning. Fear hung thick in the air. As dawn neared, the ER was eerily quiet. Normally, after a patient's death, we grieve briefly and move on. There are always more patients. But that night, we had evacuated and shut down the entire emergency department. I sat on a stretcher in the corridor, lightheaded and spent, watching stretchers carrying my unconscious colleagues to our own ICU. The very healers who tried to save Gloria now needed saving themselves. Julie, the young resident who had collapsed, was among the worst off. She was trembling with breathing problems and put in intensive care for 2 weeks. Seeing her intubated in our ICU later broke my heart. The staff's injuries were real. One nurse developed hepatitis, and Julie herself would suffer a vascular necrosis, bone death in her knees. a cruel aftermath that no mere panic attack could cause. I removed my mask and took a slow breath. The strange smell had faded. In its place was the familiar antiseptic odor of hospital hallways, normally comforting, now oddly sinister. I realized I still clutched the blood vial Susan had drawn from Gloria. I held it up to the dim light. The blood had started to separate, dark red clot and clear serum, but there, settled at the bottom, were tiny yellow-brown crystals. They looked like malignant glitter, catching the light. A shudder ran through me. With a gloved hand, I placed the vial in a specimen bag. Later, I would learn that critical evidence mysteriously went missing. That very syringe and blood sample disappeared before anyone could properly analyze it. At the time, I only felt an overwhelming dread, as if I were holding something unearthly. I remember whispering to no one, "What are you, Gloria?" The corpse on the gurney gave no answer, but in the silence I imagined a faint chemical hiss, as though whatever had escaped from her was still in the air, watching us. In the days that followed, Riverside General Hospital became the epicenter of a medical mystery. Investigators from county health, state health, even federal agencies swarmed in. I was interviewed more times than I can count. They asked me to recount every detail. How close were you standing? What did you smell? What did you feel? They drew my blood, took my urine, even swabbed inside my nose, searching for any toxin. Everything came back normal, as it did for all the affected staff. We were perplexingly healthy on paper, despite our very real symptoms that night. Early on, some officials hinted that perhaps this was a case of mass hysteria, that stress and imagination made us faint. I felt a flash of anger when I heard that term. Yes, our jobs are stressful, and yes, many who collapsed were women, but no one imagined the ammonia in Gloria's blood, or the burns and organ damage that followed. We knew what we felt. I remember Julie, pale in her ICU bed, gripping my hand with surprising strength and rasping, "Don't let them call us crazy. Something in that room poisoned us." I promised her I would make them listen. The hospital administration was tight-lipped. They did, however, shut down that trauma bay until it could be thoroughly scrubbed and ventilated. I peered in once, as environmental crews worked in the harsh cleansing light. I could still see suspicious stains on the floor where the vial had shattered. A dark part of me wondered if something supernatural had tainted that space. On a night shift a week later, when things were quiet, I thought I smelled that faint garlic odor again near room 1. My heart pounded as memories flooded back. I stood there alone in the dimly lit hall, almost expecting to see Gloria's shadow around the corner. Nothing, just my mind playing tricks. Or was it? The official investigation results trickled in, and each theory was more startling than the last. After ruling out gas leaks, toxin on hospital premises, or foul play by someone at the scene, the focus turned to Gloria herself. What had she been carrying in her blood? It took weeks, but finally we got an answer, or at least a theory that authorities felt was satisfactory. An analysis by scientists at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, a place we knew for nuclear research and cutting-edge forensics, yielded a possible explanation. According to their report, Gloria might have been using an unusual home remedy, dimethyl sulfoxide cream, as a pain reliever for her cancer. I had only heard of it in passing. A solvent, a degreaser that some desperate patients use in folk medicine. The lab's theory was complex but chilling. If Gloria had applied it on her skin frequently, it could build up in her body. The paramedics gave her oxygen on the way to the hospital, and in her oxygen-rich blood, it might have oxidized into dimethyl sulfone, a compound known to crystallize at room temperature. That could explain the crystals in her blood we saw. But the real horror came when the scientists suggested that the shocks from the defibrillator and the sudden draw of her blood in the syringe's vacuum could have converted it into dimethyl sulfate, a lethal gas. Dimethyl sulfate is a rare chemical weapon, a poison gas that can destroy cells and wreak havoc on organs if inhaled. In fact, of the 20 symptoms our staff reported that night, 19 of them matched known dimethyl sulfate poisoning effects, like fainting, shortness of breath, nausea, spasms, even paralysis. I remember reading the lab report late one evening in the hospital library, my hand shaking. The dry scientific language couldn't mask the nightmare scenario it described. A hospital's own life-saving procedures accidentally creating nerve gas from a patient's body. It was almost too strange to believe, yet it fit the facts eerily well. The oily sheen on her skin, the garlicky odor DMZO has a garlic smell. The ammonia-like scent byproduct of her anti-nausea meds, perhaps, the crystals, the symptoms, it all aligned. Riverside Coroner's Office and the investigators endorsed this theory as the best explanation we were likely to get. In official statements, they concluded that the medical staff didn't suffer from mass hysteria. They suffered from dimethyl sulfate poisoning. For a moment, I felt a grim relief. We weren't crazy. There had been poison in that room, born from a tragic chain of events and chemistry. But that relief was short-lived. As I closed the folder, a question nagged at me. Did Gloria really use it? Her family vehemently denied it, insisting she would never touch such a thing. And truth be told, no jar of it was ever found in her belongings. It was a plausible theory, but built on circumstantial evidence and science's best guesses. We could never test it or recreate it. The scenario was one of a kind. If any link in that theoretical chain was wrong, we were back to square one. Even with the DMZO explanation on the table, the case of the toxic lady was far from closed in many minds. In the break room and after hours, we whispered about alternate possibilities. The way people do when something just doesn't sit right. Some colleagues were convinced there had to be a cover-up. One theory hinted that the hospital pharmacy or lab had an accidental release of toxic chemicals that night, and Gloria's case was a convenient scapegoat. Maybe the foreline was tainted, one nurse suggested, in hushed tones, and they concocted that crazy DMZO story to hide their negligence. I had no evidence, but the thought gnawed at me because of that missing syringe of blood. How does such crucial evidence vanish, unless someone wanted it gone? Others pointed fingers elsewhere. A rumor spread that Gloria might have been involved, unknowingly, in something illicit, perhaps exposed to methylamine or other bizarre chemicals from a secret meth lab, an idea straight out of a crime show, and even more far-fetched than the official theory. A few of the more superstitious staff wondered in whispers, if this was something otherworldly, she's cursed, or radioactive. I overheard an orderly say, only half joking. At night, I found myself considering the supernatural for the first time in my scientific career. We had encountered a phenomenon with no precedent, and it left me open to any explanation, no matter how eerie. I wasn't alone in my unease. Gloria's family publicly voiced their suspicions. I saw her sister Maggie on the news, angry and grieving. It takes them 10 weeks to say she died of natural causes. I don't believe anything the county officials or the coroner says, she declared, practically spitting with frustration. She even suggested that if Gloria hadn't gone to that emergency room, she might still be alive, implying that we, the hospital, did something that killed her. That was a gut punch, to survive that night and then hear the family suggest we were to blame. But I couldn't even blame them for thinking it. We wanted answers too. Why did a young mother of 2 walk into a hospital desperate for help, only to become a literal toxic hazard? Why did our efforts to save her end up sickening us in return? When the Ramirez family hired an independent pathologist to re-examine the body, I had a flicker of hope that maybe a fresh eye would catch something. What came out of that second autopsy, however, only added to the macabre mystery. Due to the long delay, Gloria's body had been kept sealed for weeks due to contamination fears. The body was badly decomposed by the time the exam happened. Disturbingly, some organs were missing, most notably, her heart was nowhere to be found. I remember reading that and feeling a wave of nausea. How does a heart go missing from a corpse under county custody? The official answer was vague, perhaps accidentally incinerated with contaminated tissue, or misplaced during transfer. Misplaced, a heart. It was an image too ghastly to contemplate. It felt like the plot of a horror novel. The victim's heart mysteriously vanishes, as if some unseen force or secret agency snatched it to hide the true cause of her death. Likewise, the syringe that held the key to the toxic blood was never found. Every piece of physical evidence that could have shed light seemed to slip through our fingers, leaving only personal testimonies and baffling lab results. With each new revelation, I found myself oscillating between rationality and fear. By day, I pored over scientific journals, trying to understand how dimethylsulfone could linger so long in tissues, or what chemical could produce those exact symptoms, if not DMSO. By night, I was tormented by nightmares. I'd dream I was back in the ER trauma bay with Gloria, the lights flickering overhead. In the dream, when I drew her blood, the syringe filled not with liquid but with a swirling black vapor that hissed out. I'd turn and see my colleagues lying on the floor, unmoving, while a dark, indistinct figure loomed behind the gurney, watching me with glowing eyes. I would always jerk awake at that point, heart pounding, the smell of ammonia seemingly in my nostrils. I'd blink at my ceiling, convinced for a second I saw a shadow retreat there. It's been over 30 years since that night, and still no definitive answer can fully explain the toxic lady. The official reports conclude that she died of natural causes, and that the toxic fumes were likely an unusual chemical accident. Unofficially, her story has become legend, an unsolved medical mystery that medical students whisper about and conspiracy theorists dissect to this day. As for me, I left Riverside not long after, but the ghost of Gloria Ramirez followed, sometimes late on quiet nights. I still feel I'm in that I'll catch a phantom whiff of garlic and citrus in the air and find my heart racing with old fear. I avoid reminders, but fate has a cruel sense of humor. Once, while driving, I passed a roadside accident, and the rescuers' floodlights on the scene flashed in my eyes. In that strobed moment, I thought I saw Gloria standing in the road, oily sheen and all, eyes glowing in the dark. I slammed the brakes, heart in my throat, only to realize it was an illusion of light and trauma playing tricks on me. I sometimes flip through my old notebook from that period. On one page, I had scribbled the various theories: DMSO, mass hysteria, hospital gas leak, curse. Next to curse, I had drawn a shaky question mark, half in jest at the time. Now, I wonder. Gloria came to us for help, and something beyond our understanding occurred. Perhaps it was pure science, an improbable cocktail of molecules. Or perhaps something cosmic had marked her, a fate that turned her into an instrument of death in spite of herself. In my darkest moments, I imagine Gloria Ramirez as a harbinger, her tragedy a warning that there are still forces in medicine and nature we cannot comprehend. Gloria's family eventually laid her to rest in April 1994, after weeks of delay and 3 autopsies. At her funeral, a reverend spoke of that bizarre, tragic incident in the hospital emergency room that took her life, pointedly blaming the hospital for the toxic fumes. Those words sting. But, in a sense, the hospital was where her life ended under the most bizarre circumstances imaginable. I attended the funeral, standing in the back, unseen. As the coffin was lowered, I felt a gust of wind carry a faint chemical smell. I thought I was hallucinating, but it was there. I watched her family weep with grief and anger. We were all grasping for meaning in a senseless nightmare. To this day, Gloria Ramirez's case remains unresolved. The toxic lady remains an enigma in medical history, a chilling tale told whenever someone mentions the strangest cases seen in an ER. Some file her story away as an unfortunate chemical quirk. Others spin elaborate tales of conspiracy, from secret government experiments to supernatural retribution. I suspect even the officials who signed off on the reports harbored doubts. How could they not? As the writer of this story and a witness to Gloria's final hour, I find no easy closure. I can only present the facts as I lived them, colored by the terror and confusion we all felt. In quiet moments, I still see her face, sometimes in dreams, sometimes in that split second between waking and sleep. Her eyes open, pleading, as if asking why did this happen to her, and what did she become in those final moments? I whisper an apology to her memory that I could not do more, and an apology to my colleagues who suffered, that I led them into a danger we didn't understand. The hospital room where it happened has long since been renovated, scrubbed of any sign of the incident. New staff work there with no knowledge of its dark history, but sometimes I hear that patients or nurses complain of an odd garlic scent in the air there. It always makes me wonder, is it just a coincidence, or is it Gloria's unseen presence, lingering as a warning? I have come to accept that some mysteries are never fully solved. The case of Gloria Ramirez is a stark reminder that in medicine, as in life, not everything can be neatly explained away. We comfort ourselves with science, but that night I felt the limits of science acutely. There in the heart of a modern hospital, something primitive and terrifying was unleashed. Something that left doctors and nurses praying and running instead of healing. I pray that Gloria found in death the peace that eluded her in life. Her story, however, refuses to rest. It has embedded itself in me like a splinter in the mind. Even as I try to move on, a part of me remains in that fluorescent lit, surrounded by the echoes of monitors and the smell of ghostly fumes. I will never forget the toxic lady of Riverside. Never. The memory of that night stands as a ghost at the threshold of my consciousness, a reminder of how thin the veil of reality can be. How little it takes for the ordinary to twist into the inexplicable. And when the nights are especially dark and quiet, I swear I can still hear the faint sound of that heart monitor lining, and the whisper of a question that no one on earth has yet answered. And that, my friends, is the chilling mystery of the toxic lady of Riverside, a case that still baffles experts and fuels endless speculation to this day. Was it a tragic medical anomaly, a government cover-up, or something far beyond our understanding? One thing is certain, the truth remains buried in the past. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more eerie, unexplained mysteries, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and stay skeptical. See you in the next one.